Okay. All right, I'm going to kick us off. Welcome, everyone. We're glad you're here on this day of joy and hopefully celebration around the world. This is a unique Yom Ha'atzmaut in many ways, of course. I'm Beth Cousins. I am part of the staff of Jewish Federations of North America. I work on education and engagement and Israel connections and all things. I've had the great privilege in my career to work with the Shalom Hartman Institute in North America, and these are obviously extraordinary teachers, and it's a real gift to be with all of you today. This Yom Ha'atzmaut is obviously different because many of us are not, gathering in our local communities. Maybe some of us were supposed to be in Israel, we're not in Israel, and it's a challenge, but also an opportunity to create an immersive environment that really celebrates Israel in our own homes and maybe with friends, maybe in virtual communities on Zoom as we're doing here. It is a challenge. Maybe we had to be a little more creative than we otherwise might. Maybe we baked a cake for our small children that we otherwise might not have done, but it really is an opportunity. And this moment is an example of that. It might have been that we might not have had this opportunity to step into the thinking of the Shalom Hartman Institute, but instead, because we were challenged to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut in new and different ways, we're able to do this. I know when I heard Donniel Hartman speak just a few minutes ago, I was taken back to my own iEngage class. We're so blessed to be learning now with Yehuda Kurtzer and Nechumi Yaffe, who will give us a dive into some of the more heady issues of our people and of our Israel relationship today. I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Sara Labaton of the Hartman staff, who will moderate our conversation. And again, it's just great to see everyone. And to the four of you, thank you so much for joining us and really giving us this immersive environment and a way to connect with Israel and to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut today.
Great. So first of all, thank you, Beth, and our partners at JFNA for hosting this important conversation in honor of Yom Ha'atzmaut. And thank you to all of our viewers who are tuning in from home. We can't see you, but we look forward to hearing from you through the Q&A. You should feel free to send in questions and comments that you'd like our panelists to address. I'm really thrilled to be here with Donniel Hartman, who's the president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, with Nechumi Yaffe, who is a professor of political science at Tel Aviv University, and to Yehuda Kurtzer, who is the president of the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. And we're looking forward to a robust and critical conversation about the state of Jewish peoplehood in the time of COVID-19. Our panelists will be examining some of the tensions that are surfacing in the Jewish community as a result of COVID. And we'll be asking, how will COVID restructure and transform Jewish life, Jewish institutions, and Jewish communal dynamics? Finally, what are the conversations and the ideas that we need to cultivate in order to reimagine Jewish life post-COVID? We're going to start with you, Donniel. And first, Chag Sameach. I would love to hear a little bit about what Yom Ha'atzmaut looked like and felt like today from where you sit in Jerusalem.
Hi, Chag Sameach, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to be with you. Some of you know me. I'm an eternal optimist. When bad things happen, I see them, but whenever something positive happens, I think it's really important for us to stop and to recognize it and to give it space. Something remarkable happened in Yom Ha'atzmaut in Israel this year. It wasn't just that we couldn't all barbecue in the parks together. I never enjoyed that part of the Yom Ha'atzmaut in particular, and nobody hit me on the head or sprayed something in my face. So there are certain dimensions to social distancing that are positive. But the most remarkable thing that happened on Yom Ha'atzmaut this year is that officially the nastiness, the partisanship, the negative assessment of diversity, which has taken over Israeli society for years, officially came to an end. Last night, there's a beautiful ceremony in Israel on Yom Ha'atzmaut, the torch lighting ceremony, which has, from being a sort of symbolic opening to Yom Ha'atzmaut, has become one of the major annual events to identify exceptional people and to recognize that Israel is constituted by exceptional people and to give thanks to them, to recognize their contribution to the society. Now, for so long now, we are a people divided, and we celebrated our divisions. We celebrated the fact that I'm not you, that my group that I'm loyal to is different than yours, and we put other people down. And I have to tell you, I love Israel, but it's been getting hard. It's been getting really hard. The Israel I love is not an Israel where we hate each other. It's an Israel where we recognize that our society is this tapestry. For the first time that I remember, that was represented last night in this torchlight ceremony. Now, it had an overabundance of political correctness, but I want to tell you something. In the Middle East, when you have political correctness, it's not bad. There's something beautiful about political correctness. Jews and Arabs, Jews, Muslims, Christians, Sephardim, Ashkenazim, Haredim, secular, everybody was honored. The theme was collective responsibility. Even the Prime Minister of Israel, who for so many years has been us-theming our society in order to strengthen his base, opens up and says, we are all in this together. The most moving thing that I have, and he points to this famous picture of two emergency medicine volunteers, one Haredi, one Arab, praying next to each other, as his Yom Ha'atzmaut message. Even in Haaretz, you have to realize that the person who's in charge of the ceremony is a woman who, my politics aren't important today. Let's put it this way. Is not my favorite politician in Israeli society. And she has a tendency to create nastiness. She oversaw a ceremony that was absolutely beautiful. And the ability of world Jewry to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut together is also dependent on the message that comes out of Israel. Do we celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut because of what happened? Or do we celebrate it because of something that we could actually feel? Is Israel a country I could identify with? Is Israel something whose existence I could celebrate, not as a post-Holocaust phenomena, but as something that I, in 2020, feel enriches my life, something that makes me excited to be a Jew? Well, when the voice from Israel comes out saying that Israel, while it is a Jewish state, is the state of all of its citizens, and over again speaks about human rights, equality, regardless of religious, ethnic, national, sexual identity, all of the above, everything that the Declaration of Independence states that has been quieted for so long came back. And our great challenge is, can we keep it alive? Yom Ha'atzmaut, this was a good day. This was a very, very good day. We were all stuck in our houses, but there was decency. We saw each other. We made space for each other. There was room for a secular comedian and a Haredi man who gets up and says, and everything is because of the Kodesh Baruch Hu. It was all there. We had all the colors. This is the Israel that I love. This is the Israel that I've bought into. This is the Israel that my whole life is an attempt to try to build. Last night, we showed that it's possible. Our responsibility is to show that while Corona might have been the catalyst for us to be able to see and hear other people, to recognize that people are people, and that our country is the totality of it all, just like our people is the totality of it all. Our job is, the minute Corona, God willing, starts declining, that we have to double those efforts. So today, as I celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, it's a new day. We're starting the 72nd year of the State of Israel in a new way. And for that, and as a people who've been trained to sing Dayenu, that's a big Dayenu.
Thank you, Donniel. It's so moving to hear that. I want to turn to Nechumi and excavate some of the less uplifting parts of COVID in Israel, specifically in the Haredi community. And I'm speaking to you as somebody who's a member of that community, but also as a social scientist who studies that community. And I'm wondering if you could give us insight into the way that the Haredi community has viewed COVID-19 and their reactions to COVID-19, why they seem or seemed to have been operating by a different set of rules. And I know there's been a lot of media coverage around that question and a lot of controversy. So I was hoping you could speak to some of those issues.
Thank you, Sarah. Chag Sameach to everyone. And as Donniel said, really this Yom Ha'atzmaut has a new spirit in it. And at the end of my talk, I would add that I think the spirit is penetrating the Haredi community, and we do hope to, make our journey into this bigger picture of what Israel is for. But I think part of it is understanding the community. So what I would like to do is give some insight to this disobedience that we see in the community here in Israel, but also in America. It's very interesting to see that the Haredi community here in Israel and in America are operating very similarly. And we know that, there's a lot of media coverage, and also the mayor of New York just tweeted something about it that we might, attend to later. But what I would like to do is explain what's behind it. So the Haredi community is built on a few fundamental core ideas. And maybe the first and the most predominant is isolation and segregation. The Orthodox community is a modern construal. As the rabbi saw that, Jews are straying from the religious traditional way of living as a way to protect the community. They kind of said, our way of doing it is stepping out, stepping in, and kind of being sheltering from the world and telling ourselves stories that we actually can be segregated from the world, we can be sheltered. This leads to a sort of behaviors. For example, being disconnected from media, being disconnected from the internet, from smartphones, from news. And we have to understand the Haredi communities, not just in Israel, also in America, are not living in the woods, in Utah, in remote places. They are living in the center and the heart of very big 21st centuries. So they have to tell themselves a story about their existence. And their story is, we're just not affected by the world. We live by our own set of rules, and we have different understanding how the world really operates and how the world is functioning. So this is very nice and good. But when epidemic like this coronavirus breaks out, it's a challenge because, ignoring complexity of the Western world does not eliminate them. Science work even if you don't believe in it. So they've got a problem. So we have to understand that we have to be empathetic and understand that living in this consensus that you have this magical bubble that it's all about pureness and the Torah and tradition and mitzvot, and you're not affected by the world, has its limits. And it seems that in this epidemic, the community actually exposed is vulnerability, because the rabbis that the people really trust and they attend to them to authority were very indecisive. At least in Israel, we know they were giving very incomplete information about the virus. They do not understand science. They do not understand how viruses work. And when they instructed the community, everything was very stuttering, and their spirit of command was, we don't really know how it works, but, those seculars, doctors, everything was very, very vague, and people just did not trust, did not believe. And since they are being disconnected, they just did not follow the rules. When this changed, and I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes, then 90% of the community are obeying and just keeping all the instructions. The other thing that we have to understand is the structure of the community. The strength of the community is the community. In this sense, the Haredim are never internalized this liberal idea of the basic human unit as the individual. The Haredim as a traditional community see the community and God and the religion in the center. And when they operate in their everyday life, it's around the community structures. It's around the minyanim, 3 times a day to gather to tefillah. It's the the ritual bath. It's the meeting with family. We have to understand the strength of.
Nechumi, you're breaking out a little bit. I'm going to wait until I'll give Nechumi a few minutes to come back on, but in the meantime, I'd like to turn to you, Yehuda, and ask if you could comment a little bit about the, these are issues that are raised by what Nechumi's talking about, but questions of loyalty and obligation, whether, there's been a lot of discussion about how Jews are, how much loyalty Jews should have to other Jews, to their more immediate neighbors, to the other citizens and inhabitants of their country, and I think that's something that it's raised by the controversies in the Haredi community, but it's also a more general question that's been coming up as well.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And I'm sorry that we lost Nechumi there. I hope that just short-term technical difficulties and she can join right back in. Would that we all had IT people in our homes at all times. So I do want to respond to a little bit to what Nechumi was. We'll come back to you in a few minutes, Nechumi, if that's okay.
Amazing.
I just started.
I'm sorry. Good. Go ahead.
I want to respond a little bit that picks up from some of what Nechumi was talking about, which is what becomes visible as a rupture in the Jewish people. And it's a reciprocal rupture, where when some Jews perceive that other Jews are acting in ways that are in their own self-interest, it raises the question of what should our response be. I think Nechumi and I we talked about this, where there was even an effort in Israel by some residents of Ramat Gan adjacent to Bnei Brak to erect a wall between themselves and Jews in Bnei Brak. So on one hand, that's one side of this question of what do Jews owe each other in the midst of a crisis like this, especially when we perceive ourselves following by different rules. But it also picks up a little bit on what Donniel was talking about at the beginning, and the question of this big, larger question of a breakdown of a notion of Jewish peoplehood, especially between North American Jews and Israeli Jews, which I have to say are oftentimes most potent for many of us around days like Yom HaZikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut, when even those of us who identify as Zionists feel very far away. And where the time difference, you have moments when Israelis have already moved on to Yom Ha'atzmaut and American Jews are still theoretically in Yom HaZikaron, and you're watching your friends barbecue while you're still in Yom HaZikaron, and the whole holiday is premised on their experience over there. And so we know that there's a pulling apart between our two communities, and it's mostly not time zone related, it's mostly on the basis of ideological and political difference. The simple idea I want to play with is that the reality is that the test of Jewish peoplehood is, and whether it's a real stable and strong enough commitment that then creates loyalty and then creates obligation, is not when things are good. The test of Jewish peoplehood is precisely when there are other members of your own people who are doing things you don't like. Because if people are doing what you already agree with and identify with, then it's not Jewish peoplehood, it's values alignment. So of course you support your own viewpoints and you want to see them played out. The problematics of Jewish peoplehood, in fact, is only interesting when there are other people who identify with the same broad national identity. It's the same broad national story, but are doing things that you view as implicating you, undermining you, or acting contrary to your interest. In this respect, what makes Jewish peoplehood such an interesting topic and the questions of our relationship to each other so powerful is that the whole notion of Jewish peoplehood is kind of rooted in this weird paradox. We are a people constructed on the basis of a religion, the adherence to which is optional for the people. right? All of our categories of Jewish people had come out of a religious tradition, but the whole power of Jewish people is you can belong to something that doesn't require you to believe, behave, or perform your loyalties in ways that are similar to what other Jews do. And so it's not surprising to see that that notion of Jewish peoplehood creates so much tension between us, because it has elements of a religion which require adherence, and has elements of a national structure which don't require adherence, but do require some sense of collective responsibility. What I would want to suggest for the moment that we're in is the following problem that's raised by the coronavirus, which is that that I think many of us feel that this crisis, as it relates to this question of Jewish peoplehood, is pushing us into two totally different extremes. On one hand, the very activity of having to stay at home, to not be able to even do our local activities of Jewish community and Jewish peoplehood, like going to shul or visiting our neighbors, makes us feel that the primary set of relationships and obligations and commitments are supposed to be hyper-local. Your home, your family, your place where you live, and maybe your neighbors, because we're dependent on our neighbors a little bit. In Israel, I know this is played out by, we don't have the same rules of 100 meters or 500 meters, but those rules create a consciousness of a hyper-local. And we can imagine that has a denominational effect, right? It's only geography, it's only the people I'm supposed to be connected to. There's an equally powerful pull of this moment, which is the fact that a global pandemic does not discriminate on the basis of race or economic status. It makes no difference. And in fact, there are aspects of the coronavirus that remind us of how powerfully globally equal we are and how powerfully interconnected we are. And this feels to me like a really powerful metaphor for this question of Jewish peoplehood and the pull and push between the sense that we are supposed to stay tribal, local, or even national, or whether we're supposed to see ourselves as part of the family of nations. Where I think we have some resources within our tradition to really think about this is, I really don't think our tradition wants us to imagine that loyalty to one's own group versus loyalty to the whole world are in any way in tension with each other. And all sorts of political questions, they come up. Do I give money to this or do you give money to that? But I think the whole story from the Bible through the present for the Jewish people has been a story that argues for the idea of spheres of belonging, that I belong to something locally, which connects me to something larger and national. For the Jewish people, it's family to tribe to the Jewish people. And the reason I do that is not because I prioritize my group over another group, but because I have a change strategy for the world. And the big difference really between our tradition and Christianity and Islam was the question of whether you're supposed to be able to transcend your national belonging to achieve universal objectives, or whether, as Christianity and Islam tried to do, to try to in some ways obliterate our national belongings in the pursuit of that global good. So I find kind of fascinating that even though we're pushed in these two directions, I mean, we see nationalism and globalism now are becoming extreme articulations of themselves, precisely because they seem like they verify for the people who believe in them that the coronavirus proves that they're right. You know, I prove to you that we should have closed borders because look what can happen when you don't close the borders, as though a virus wouldn't even cross those borders in that way. And in the same case would be make for extreme versions of globalism. But I'm just kind of intrigued by the idea that maybe a deeper understanding of Jewish peoplehood as a commitment to the local in service of the national, a commitment to the local in service of the global, actually might be a paradigm or a model that could serve even beyond our own understanding of Jewish peoplehood to be a model for other communities and citizens as well.
Thanks, Yehuda. Nechumi, do you want to respond to that or pick up where you left off?
What Yehuda is saying is actually what's happening in the community, the Haredi community that is, being so insular and telling themselves that we just can do the things that we do. We like swim in a pond, and they don't realize that we are part of an ocean. And I think this is what people are in the community are realizing, that their actions and their behavior is influencing others. And this myth that they told themselves that they can just do without is actually just a myth, and they are affected, actively affecting and being affected by others. And those and the walls that they build it with with being disconnected to internet, being disconnected to, well, just they saw it as an advantage, but this has became the disadvantage, and this is what actually is affecting so badly their community. The other idea that I think is very, very interesting is the way it operates in Israel. So when the pandemic started, people in Israel were not following the instructions. And when stories from Bora Park and Williamsburg started coming, the people are really dying. This was the first time Haredi here in Israel started doing quarantine. So in a way, the geography of Haredi people is when people are dying in Bora Park, this is when it's contagious. Because being 10 minutes away from Tel Aviv, when there is people who are dying, it does not affect us. But when people in Bora Park die, this is how it affects us. Mm-hmm. It just shows the geography in this sense is not it's not a question of like, real oceans and mountains. It's the way we perceive things. But this is not enough because people in America operate different, and we operate different, and we are part of the Israeli society. And I think this is going back to Donniel's point. I think there is a very strong trend in the Haredi community asking themselves very, very hard, tough questions, inner questions about leadership, about what is their journey into the big Israeli picture, what's their responsibility in this, in this state, and wanting to take part in the state. And I think it's really the silver lining of this coronavirus that in many ways broke some of the boundaries, the imaginary boundaries, and hopefully, we shift things around in the Haredi community. And there's been shifts. I can definitely talk about there's hundreds of percentile of difference in internet usage. Basically, the biggest growth in internet use is in Haredi population. Thousands of Haredi were disconnected from internet and were, telling themselves we can be just not part of the world, are saying, well, being part of the world is being part of reality, and it's affecting us, and it's about time for us to face it. And this is a huge shift. And also rabbis are making this shift. Rabbis are broadcasting through Zoom, using internet. Is some shift in the inner leadership, and it seems like more moderate kind of talk is happening on an outer surface. So, as Donniel said, I think we are for a very good time, hopefully for Israel and hopefully in America as well.
Great. I see one of the questions that came in, and it's relevant really to comments that all three of you made, is how do we, some of these silver linings, how do we actually make sure that they become structural and that they last past COVID-19? And Yehuda, I'm thinking about some of the some of the implications for citizenship and for how Jews in North America experience their relationship to their own civic identity and to their neighbors.
Yeah, I think there are two possible implications of this, and I agree with both of the co-panelists that if we use kind of an appreciative inquiry strategy, what's interesting and new and working today, then that's a good way to build on those strengths and to take them beyond this crisis. Recognizing that the main work that has to be done right now is by the first responders and by those who are responsible for our society, that we as the Jewish people might still be able to extract some learnings out of this experience and build from it. I think the first, which you alluded to, is something that has just made more and more sense to me in the last couple of years, which is, I think we as American Jews have largely treated, really for the last two generations, we've treated America as a kind of backdrop for negotiating intra-Jewish questions. We kind of in some ways take America for granted, not recognizing that just as the healthy functioning of Israel as a Jewish democratic state is an existential Jewish issue for Jewish Israelis and for non-Jewish Israelis. So too, I think we know this, especially for the last 5 years, the healthy functioning of an American democracy in ways that are compatible with Jewish values and that are more than just good for the Jews as a set of citizens, but that conceptually works for us as the Jewish people, is an integral and essential vehicle for the thriving of American Jews as well. So what would it look like, for instance, for American Jews to lean in again as part of our power structures and our education structures to strengthening American democracy? What is it? If American Jews are Americans, bad public health system is a Jewish issue. And I know some of our colleagues are working and thinking on why has civics education dropped out so significantly out of Jewish education? Why is it the case from a theoretical level that if you Google the term Jewish and democratic, it pertains exclusively to the state of Israel? All the theoretical literature, even though American Jews have actually been engaged in a process of Jewish and democratic reconciliation as part of the American story for much longer. So I think that's one story. I think the other is in Jewish education, where I know many people, ourselves included, are struggling with how do we build relationships between American Jews and Israeli Jews when the easiest technology we had until now was to put people on a plane. So the absence of Jewish camp potentially this summer, the absence of Hartman Institute programs, the cancellation of birthright trips, all of that stuff eliminates a shortcut. And where I want to lean into also is the conceptual, going back to the old, what are the old technologies? Pre-airplane, pre the state of Israel, where the Jewish people built a sense of fellowship and peoplehood with Jews who were far away from them. And there's something very exciting about that as a throwback question for us that could actually get us, you could actually build a much stronger economy, because if it requires $3,000 to $5,000 for a person to have a relationship with other Jews just to get there, then we've actually built a fundamental weakness into our own technologies towards Jewish solidarity and Jewish peoplehood. So that's another area where I would love to see the Jewish educational establishment really try to say, since we couldn't do peoplehood that way during this moment, we found stronger ways to build those relationships that endure long beyond this moment. Great.
There's a lot of optimism that I'm hearing, but I also want to lean into some of the challenges that we're going to be facing in Israel, in North America, in the wake of COVID. Donniel, can you speak about some of the specific challenges that are going to be facing Israeli institutions as a result of the economy, as a result of politics? Is the relationship between North American Jews and Israel going to deteriorate as a result of this, or do you really see opportunities for coming closer together?
Thank you. As Yehuda said beforehand, COVID has reminded all of us that we are very regional and local. Our experiences in Israel are very different than your experiences in North America. Or an experience in Jerusalem is different than an experience in Tel Aviv or in Bnei Brak. You know, for a week now, there hasn't been a new person infected in Tel Aviv, or 75% of Israeli cities. There's nothing happening. So there is a sense whereby, as you just said, where there's a strong regional pull. And part of what we have to recognize is that that's normal. It's even normal in a family. The assumption that we're all in this together and we're all still sitting in the kitchen assumes an infantilization of people. We're like a family with grown-up children who've married and who have multiple homes, and we don't have singular interests. So when Jewish collective life is dependent on some mythic commonality it's immature. It usually requires a really strong amount of anti-Semitism. So that's when Jewish people does the best, because anti-Semitism is not local, at least in theory. If we have a really good, gesund anti-Semitism, then we're all back in the kitchen table again, and we're all sitting around. But if, thank God, that's not where we are, we have different interests. We do. In the Hartman Institute, Yehuda and I, we have different interests. We have issues in Israel, we have issues in North America, and we have issues together. Now, the assumption that somehow Jewish people is going to require us to all be, that's not normal. It's not normal. And then we get all depressed when it's not so. We are different, and we have separate agendas and separate concerns. The question is, though, how do we transcend them? You know, as the anthropologist Clifford Geertz says, that culture is the sum of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. The question is, what are the stories the Jewish people are going to tell ourselves about ourselves right now? That's right. 90% of the Jewish people live in Israel or North America. It's 45%, huge societies. What are the stories we're going to tell? Are we going to tell stories? Or are we going to try to tell stories in which the other is part of my story? Not as a tzedakah, not as somebody who I want to help because they're dying, but can we create stories in which my religious life, my sense of peoplehood is enriched because you're part of my story, and vice versa? So right now, there is no doubt that we have serious challenges. But when the Jewish people face challenges, the question is, what are we going to do? Are we going to get up and are we going to shape our destiny, or are we going to be victims of our destiny? There is no doubt that the stronger the Jewish people are, we are like a family whose children are growing older and each one has their own agendas. That is healthy. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually, anything else would be insane. It's infantilization. But within that, now, what do we do? Now, all too often, I believe that we're telling stories about ourselves that don't fit who we are. We're telling stories about ourselves which either assume a profound crystal nacht reality, which is not what Jews are feeling, or which infantilize each other. And so right now, through COVID, we could continue a process of just, I have issues now, America's broken, Israel's this, and each one just go, we could do that. But Yom Ha'atzmaut is not just a celebration of Israel's independence. Israel brought back to the center of Jewish consciousness a sense that we are a collective, a sense that was beginning to disappear towards the end before Zionism. Now, Israel is not just, Israel is not the sole carrier of Jewish peoplehood, but part of what we celebrate on Yom Ha'atzmaut is not just the rebirth of Israel, but the recognition that we are a people. Some of us live in a Jewish nation state. Some of us live in one of the greatest societies to ever welcome Jews. Now let's tell a story. And in telling stories, there's one last point. We all grew up on sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me. There's nothing more destructive than that statement. Sticks and stones do break your bones, but words profoundly harm you. And we need a national project of thinking very carefully about the words we tell about each other, the stories we begin to create. And those stories shape a culture. They shape an awareness. Now, there is no doubt. I'm not the opposite. I don't want to belittle the differences, and I don't want to belittle the different interests. The question now is, what do we do about it? And so as we're celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut, my sense of optimism is not because I think everything's going to be fine, but because I believe it can be fine. It's in our hands. What are the stories we want to tell ourselves about ourselves? And how do Israeli Jews and North American Jews tell stories about each other in which we celebrate our difference and celebrate our different needs, but at the same time, reach out and begin to say, what is the Israel that I want? What is the Israel that would inspire me? And Israelis would say, what is that that's happening in North American Judaism that would inspire me? That's important to me. Words matter because words constitute the story, and the story constitutes our culture, and our culture is the foundation of our identity.
Great. So I'm seeing a number of questions in the chat around anti-Semitism, and that's a story that other people are telling about us. And I'm wondering if the three of you could respond to whether you think anti-Semitism is going to persist, mutate, how is it going to change as a result of this, or maybe it won't?
it's always a winning strategy to gamble on the pessimism around optimism, you know, because that's always optimism is never is easily falsifiable, and pessimism is not, right? Because it can always get worse.
But Yehuda, being an optimist is much more fun.
Oh no, there's the only way to live. I mean, otherwise, you know, if you live as a pessimist, certainly as a Jewish educator, if you live as a pessimist, you're just using the facts of the world to teach, as opposed to teaching values or visions of how you would want the world to be different. I think it's, look, when Deborah Lipstadt was at Hartman last summer, she spoke about how, I don't remember what the exact metaphor she used, but she talked about how anti-Semitism thrives in a certain set of conditions in the world, usually around instability and anxiety. And when there are social and political instabilities and anxieties, that's a healthy breeding ground for anti-Semitism, as is a healthy breeding ground for all types of polarizing ideologies and all sorts of scapegoating ideologies. So it's not surprising if there are rises in this story. I was honestly scared that the first stories that were taking place around the coronavirus spread were connected to Orthodox communities in New York, not Haredi communities, but modern Orthodox communities in New York. They were connected to the AIPAC conference, and thankfully, epidemiologically, that wasn't really true. Those happened to have been powerful gatherings of people, and apropos Nechumi's comments before, it's not surprising where you have communities that believe in the value of community that viruses can spread more quickly, but that's a testament to their quality, not just to the capacity to spread viruses. So I thought it was going to be worse in that arena. I'm not surprised to see a spike online with this stuff, but we have been living in a globally anxious moment for some time now, having to do with the rise of nationalism in America, in Israel, in Europe, and elsewhere. And so I think it could be another kind of log on the fire of that story. But I'm with Donniel that there's very little wisdom we can bring to bear on arguing that point with people. And there is a lot of wisdom we can gain from saying, how do we still construct an optimistic, profound Jewish life that takes seriously our own commitments, our own communities? Because it's not that I devalue the institutions that do the work of fighting anti-Semitism. That's really important, but it can become the totality of your existence. And we have too much affluence, too much opportunity, and too much good stuff at our disposal to make that the focus of our consciousness.
Just to go a little bit deeper in that, there's been some questions around de Blasio's response yesterday to the particular the funeral in Williamsburg. So I'm wondering if you can comment on that and on what the Jewish response to that should be. Yeah, Nechumi, please.
Okay, hi. So first of all, I feel like the problem with de Blasio's comment is the language he used. He spoke about the entire Jewish community, and this really perpetuates all the, good old anti-Semitic rhetoric that does not distinguish between different kind of Jews, between different segments, the fact that the entire Jewish population in United States are so careful, are so obeying all the rules, and just taking one segment and making it the whole story is almost the traditional scapegoating that echoes the centuries of blaming Jews and spreading epidemics. So the language, the use of the language is very sad, and I think increased fear, and also I have heard that like many pastors, Christian pastors, also kept doing some services, even though it was fully prohibited, and no one ever said like the Christians are spreading, the Christians are not obeying. So blaming an entire religion is wrong, and it's just wrong language, wrong attitude. I'm sure it was like he didn't mean it. It just was a use of language. But I do think that between the unorthodox and the movie, the Netflix movie, and the disobedience in Williamsburg, there is a lot of attention centering this this neighborhood specifically. I feel like from what I heard, a lot of people, are interested in understanding what's going on and are, polarized between like thinking that's very exotic and very interesting and to a very stupid, primitive kind of culture. So I think there is a cultural.
I think we lost you again, Nechumi. Yehuda, did you want to jump in?
Just briefly, it's just worth folks who only caught the tweets from de Blasio. There's a lot of good reporting right now about what actually happened yesterday, which included the fact that the mayor's office, in coordination with the NYPD, actually worked with the community in question that had a major funeral yesterday, thinking that they could allow them to do the funeral and to control it. And what was really unfortunate about de Blasio's remarks was that he didn't kind of acknowledge his own role in trying to do something that they never really should have done, and then calling out that same community. And I agree with Nechumi. It's a really bad choice of words, and it correlates to the president, to last week expressing a public concern about specifically Muslims observing Ramadan and saying, we hope that they're held to the same standard that Christians are held, which was such, it's so poisonous when you identify single communities. I think the larger question for the de Blasio administration is, why, on one hand, try to allow this community to do this and then call them out when your own system failed? I think the most powerful piece of data yesterday was 67 degrees in New York. People were outside, and they were outside regardless of whether they were Haredi or not. And so it was really bizarre to see this community called out in that way.
Great. There's also been some questions orienting away from this divide with the Haredim, just around Jewish life in general, where we've seen Jewish life ritually, educationally, communally move to these online platforms. Is that a positive? Is that a negative? Should that be something that continues ongoingly? You've spoken about some of the advantages of that. What pieces of that should we keep, and what pieces of that are actually not healthy and not beneficial to our community? Donniel, do you want to weigh in on that?
There is no doubt that there's brand new opportunities that we never knew about before. And these opportunities are going to force all of our institutions to look at our core business plans and to rethink what we thought was possible, what we how we functioned. At the end of the day, what we know about people, we're the human being is by definition a social animal, and part of what we need to do is to find the right balance between the potential that this offers and not fantasize into believing that we're actually having a relationship right now. Now, in some sense we are, but in some very deep sense we're not. And what's again, I don't want to, it's going to sound kind of silly, me always being this optimist, but it's just my nature. As an institute that spends a tremendous amount of our resources doing live, intense programs with people in a room, this challenges us to say how much of that is necessary. Do you have to do it 100% of the time? Can you do it 25% of the time? Also to ask, what are new opportunities that this allows us? But at the end of the day, the issue is not the delivery system. The issue at the end of the day is the content that you're delivering. Jews, or too many Jews, do not necessarily feel inspired by their Jewish life right now. Is there a way for you to use any technology, not to do short-term, and this is why, going back to the anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is not going to help Jewish identity today. It's just not. It's going to be there. We're going to have to learn how to deal with it. But, somebody in another 200 years is going to ask, one second, they were talking about de Blasio this was the sign. The New York Jewish community was worried about the anti-Semitism. Like, from a perspective of history, it's almost going to seem bizarre. I think our over response is, again, I think from a historical perspective, is going to be quite interesting. Because the real difficult work is not how do we build a community with somebody because we're being threatened. The real difficult work is how do we make Judaism, how do we make Israel alive? That's the difficult work. Now, technology, great. That's going to be another medium. We're going to be able to reach more people are getting used to doing things this way. Great. Are there new opportunities to create long-term, in-depth relationships? At the end of the day, the fundamental challenge that so many Jews face is that we want to live a serious Jewish life, but we're not willing to give Judaism using technology a sufficient amount of bandwidth in our lives to actually find a way to make it interesting. We want to be all excited. We want to live for profoundly interesting lives, but we have a minute. I have 15. Expand the bandwidth. There's a catch-22 in Jewish life. We have too thin a bandwidth to enable Jews to know enough about Judaism to actually maybe give it a chance to be successful or meaningful in our lives. So now with technology, we have other means. But at the end of the day, this is going to be part of the story. These are, again, we like to focus on the delivery systems. The primary issue is the content. And that applies both to Judaism, it applies to Israel. At the beginning, we talked about what's the issue? Yehuda mentioned this, I can't travel to Israel right now. But the serious issue is not when you travel to Israel, it's what you see. The issue is not, it's whether if you're going to be on the internet, you're going to be on this medium or that medium, how do you talk about Israel? How do you talk about Judaism? And so I would recommend that that's where we have to, that core business, that Judaism is about ideas and values and experiences, and how do we create ones which are sufficiently important? That's the principal issue that we're going to face. And God willing, technology, the digital is going to expand our horizons to deliver. But what we deliver at the end of the day is going to still be dependent on the quality of what we produce.
Great.
Yeah.
Please.
That I felt very nervous, that both on, obviously a big piece of our work is building relationships conceptually and human between Israelis and Americans as part of the same enterprise. And I hope that this moment generates creativity for that narrative, for that language of relationship. What are we really about? But I also think that there is more. I've seen more curiosity now, sometimes with a lot of edge, around the relationship between non-Haredi Jews and Haredi Jews, which is also one of the pressure points in Jewish peoplehood right now. There's more curiosity now that I've seen in a long time. Now, some of it is angry, some of it is anger, but there's also genuine curiosity. And there too, I think there's place here for not just explaining who are Haredi Jews, what are their choices, but the same kind of narrative language. What does it mean to have a Jewish people where there are such different, among our people, such different, deep and sincere understandings of modernity? Such deep and different and sincere understandings of enlightenment, of the relationship between Jews and non-Jews. It's extraordinary. The biodiversity of the Jewish people is extraordinary. So one of the things that I hope also outlives this is not just webinars to understand the Haredi community, but how do you actually build bridges between non-Haredi and Haredi Jews in New York and in Tel Aviv and other places, because they recognize in moments like this that our lives and our identities are actually deeply tied into each other.
Great. Nechumi, did you want to comment on that?
Yehuda, I couldn't agree more. And I have to admit that I think I'm quite optimistic from the comments that I'm getting the past months, beyond the anger, the real anger, and also fear. Here in Israel, there is a lot of fear. They just, we all going to get sick because of them. I think there's a genuine understanding that we have to really work together. And I think it's the first time that I hear it from both sides, is almost like a maturity, especially in the Haredi community, some of the leaders that we have to think about our journey into the Israeliyut, and we have to kind of think of like a new contract with what it means to be Israeli and what it means to take full part. And I've heard rabbis and politician speaks in a way they never did. Today, Gaffney is a parliament member, actually gave a topic that wasn't touched since I think like the beginning of the state about the position of Haredim and the state. And he alluded to the fact that Haredim were never, like Torah was never learned like it's being learned in Israel. It is because of the state. This was something that even if people understood it, they never expressed it, and especially not Knesset members that were always fighting and saying that the whole world is against us. I feel like the rhetoric are, as Donniel said, the rhetoric are changing and the narrative is changing because we think of our identity in a wider, with wider spectacles. And I do hope and think we are about to see some changes in this arena from Haredim and from Chilonim that looking for ways to collaborate. I heard that in Monsey, there was in New York, there was like this project of Haredim actually donating plasma, trying to,
Yes.
trying to find ways into the collective, going beyond the boundaries. I'm not there to sense, is it a real thing? Does it have any foundations? Are they asking themselves some questions about citizenship? But here in Israel, it's definitely on the rise, and this is very optimistic. This is
Great.
This is a good thing.
Good. I want to express my gratitude to Donniel, Yehuda, and Nechumi for joining us today, and to our hosts at JFNA for having us, and to everybody here who participated and chimed in. It was really a pleasure to do this with you. I'm going to turn it over to Rachel from JFNA.
I also really want to express gratitude and appreciation for Donniel, Yehuda, and Nechumi taking your time today to unpack the complexity of peoplehood, of Israel, of America, of all of it. It's interesting. One of the questions that we didn't get to was, can Shalom Hartman Institute please bring us together more regularly to discuss these issues? So I'm passing that on to you. And I invite you and everyone on this call to please join us at 2 p.m. for a global celebration of Israel. Go to jewishtogether.org and you can find links to participate on Facebook and YouTube. Again, I'm grateful, I am moved, and I am intrigued to continue this conversation with you all as well.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Thank you. Toda.